Howdy, folks. Professor Parks, PhD here, and I make content on astronomy, science skepticism, and mental health. Thank you for joining me for another sort of impromptu stream. It's the only streams I appear to be capable of doing. Today, I wanted to talk about something that has been brewing over the last couple weeks in terms of NASA funding or proposed NASA funding. Now, I will state that all of what I'm about to talk about is preliminary. It is at the very earliest stages, but it's alarming because one, it's unprecedented, and two, it would require a significant amount of pushback from the Republican Party in order for the proposed budget that I'm going to talk about to be changed in any significant way. So this is all, again, this is all not speculative. Some of what I'm going to talk about is speculative, but what I'm going to talk about, the cuts may not be as severe in reality when the budget finally gets passed than what I'm about to show you. For those of you who are not aware, howdy, Roshin. For those of you who are not aware, that included me until a couple of weeks ago. The way that the federal budget works in the United States is that every year, the administration puts forward a budget that the Congress then votes on, discusses, negotiates, and ultimately a final budget gets passed. Well, the first stage of that is something called a passback. And this is basically, you can think of this as a first draft of the proposed budget. This is the first draft of the budget that they're going to send to Congress to negotiate. Howdy, Coco. And so again, these values will probably change. How much? I am not optimistic, but I will let you know. What I'm going to discuss is I'm going to discuss what the ramifications are of these cuts are to NASA, to us here at George Mason, to potential to astronomy students who may be watching this, grad students who may be watching this. I am not currently a research scientist, haven't been for a while. I am primarily education focused, but I still have some experience to draw on, and I still have friends and colleagues who are research. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is based on some amount of experience. But again, I want to caveat all this and say that I'm not a strict expert, but I definitely wanted to start sending the alarm out about this. Now, let's get into this. Howdy, Versa, Turing test. Where do I want to go with this? Go here. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this article from USA Today because it has some nifty graphics to it. First off, I love this cover image. I'm probably going to steal this idea of that NASA is being eclipsed by the Trump administration. So let's break it down to, well, let's first start off by looking at this graph. This is the NASA budget since its inception. The blue line is the actual appropriation, how much money was given to NASA, whereas the dark blue line is the budget that has been scaled for inflation. And so obviously you can see the huge spike is because of the Apollo program. At the height of the Apollo program, howdy signals, at the height of the Apollo program, NASA was receiving about 4% the GDP, the nation's GDP in terms of funding. But once the space race was won, shall we say, that funding significantly dropped to around the 0.4%. Is it that? I can never get the order of magnitude right. I believe it's 0.4% of the GDP. So not a significant amount. Definitely not it's a fairly insignificant amount to the overall budget. It's either 0.4% or 0.04%. But you get the idea. It's not a significant fraction of the US budget. You can see that over time, there have been some, So some increases, some decreases over the administration, but basically, the general trend is that the NASA budget has increased by approximately 1.8% every year. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but on average, regardless of administration, it has increased by 1.8% across the board. This cut is historic in the fact that point is around 0.4%. Okay, I got the order of magnitude. Um, it is historic because if this budget passes, well, you can first start off by seeing that the budget for 2025 is already lower than inflation. Adjusted for inflation, it's already lower than that has been pre or basically post Apollo. Uh, NASA funding has never been this low, aside from say 1960, 1959. Again, adjusted for inflation. Obviously, from a dollars and cents point of view, then we have gotten more money since than we did in 1980. But from a normalized perspective, we are spending the least amount on NASA now than we ever have pretty much in its conception. And that's getting worse. So here is the proposal that's going forward. Right now, NASA has been allocated around $25 billion. And that is split up over 5 rough categories. As you can see, that the 2026 budget proposal is 20 billion. That's roughly a 20% decrease in the overall funding for NASA. Science Mission Directorate, effectively what that translates to is admin overhead. That's facilities costs, administration, HR, things of that nature, salaries, things of that nature. That's going to be cut by roughly half or so. You get to planetary science. Planetary science is all the fun stuff that's been in the news, basically going to Mars, going to the moon, sending probes to Uranus, that sort of thing. That is getting the least cut, I think, fractionally. I think planetary science is going to see the least drop or the smallest drop in their funding than any other department, for better or for worse. Then you've got earth science. Earth science, effectively, really what that translates to is climate change. Anything, any program that is going to be that is associated with NASA, such as satellite monitoring, things of that nature, that's getting cut significantly. Again, I'm speculating as to I can only speculate as to what specific missions are being cut or specific programs within Earth science are being cut. But my intuition is that the majority of that cut is going to defund climate science done by NASA. Yay. Heliophysics. Heliophysics is being cut in half. That is somewhat troubling because aside from the case that I'm going to talk about, which is more relevant to me, heliophysics is not just it's a study of the sun, but it's not just for shits and giggles. It's not like, oh, we just really kind of want to know why sunspots come and go. It actually has real world implications. The sun goes through various periods of activity, which means that it goes through various periods where it puts out a whole lot of radiation and periods where it doesn't put out a whole lot of radiation. Some of that radiation is collimated into flares or less collimated into CMEs, where you have more radiation being put or material being thrown into the solar system in one area than another. Basically, what it comes down to is that the amount of irradiation that an astronaut or anyone in orbit will experience changes daily. Those levels can get dangerously high. Not only that, this radiation can get so high occasionally if you have a particularly energetic flare pointed directly at us. It is harmful to satellites. It's harmful to electronics. One of the ways that SpaceX and other satellite companies mitigate this effect is by they know they have some warning that, hey, a storm is coming. And so they can deorbit their satellites, get them lower into the Earth's atmosphere, get more protection from the incoming flare. However, flare prediction is pretty much like weather prediction. It's not precise, and you do not get a whole lot of warning. There is no sort of 10-day forecast for this sort of thing. So, understanding how space weather works has real world implications for any sort of advancement beyond the Earth's surface. Or SpaceX really should give a shit about heliophysics research because, again, it very much impacts their bottom line. Any sort of saddle or any sort of hotels that Branson wants to put up there, any sort of space tourism that Bezos wants to get into, Mars missions, moon missions, all of that is going to be is going to require a very good understanding of space weather, specifically solar activity, because there are dangers there to both electronics and to human beings that need to be very well studied. And NASA is planning on cutting that pretty significantly. But this next section is the one that's most troubling. Particularly, this is for any astronomy students that I might have, or anyone out there who is an astronomy student who is planning on going into graduate school, who is currently in an astronomy grad student. I'm fairly confident that if there are any of you in the audience, your advisor has already talked to you about this. Basically, those in the field. Astrophysics. Astrophysics covers what you might consider pure science. So this is the funding that goes to missions that are interested in cosmology, that are interested in dark matter, dark energy, that are interested in how exoplanets form, how they evolve, that sort of stuff. Basically, things that do not have any financial relevant value within the next 10 years. That is getting cut by 2/3. That is almost an untenable range, untenable cut. What this means is that NASA funding for grants, is going to be cut by 2/3. That is a massive amount of where the funding comes from in university research. Basically, the monies that support the astronomy departments, astronomy grad students, and astronomy jobs, a good chunk of that comes from NASA. Now, another chunk of it comes from the National Science Foundation. I have no idea what, if anything, has been done over on that side. I don't know if DOGE has taken its chainsaw to it. I don't know what the budget proposal for the NSF is. I can't imagine that it's very rosy. But NASA, huge chunk. There's also something called the Keck Foundation, which also supplies some money to astronomy. But this is seriously undercutting the entirety of the field of astronomical research. So, so what this is ultimately going to do is that it is going to, if you want to, there is a claim to be made that the United States is the cutting edge when it comes to space technology and astronomical research. I'm not trying to be arrogant, just saying that is the predominant worldview right now, is that the United States is at the cutting edge of astronomical and space technologies. This will kill that idea. This will make us no longer the cutting edge. Effectively, what this means is you're going to have students who are going to try to get into grad schools. If this budget passes, again, this is all speculative in a way, in the sense that this is not passed. This isn't even proposed to Congress yet. This is what Trump wants. So these numbers will probably change. So the cuts may not be nearly as drastic, but let's be honest, the Republican Party has not done a whole lot of standing up to what Trump wants. And the Democratic Party doesn't have any power. So if these get changed, if these numbers get changed, they're not going to change by a whole lot. Um, so the reality is we're going to see significant cuts to astronomical funding unless some sort of, unless people start getting really loud really soon. When you cut funding to astronomical research like this, that means that departments can no longer, or basically will essentially have to have a hiring freeze on grad students. So they will take less grad students than they would ordinarily because they literally do not have the money to support such grad students. Grad school for someone who has been applied to a grad school and been accepted to that grad school is free. Tuition is free. Fees are not. That's another subject entirely. But tuition is free, and you do get some form of compensation, some form of salary. Typically, in your first couple of years, that salary and the tuition is waived, and the salary is provided by the department. After that, the expectation is that you are supported by your PhD advisor through grants they receive from places like NASA. So, if they can't get the money from NASA because NASA doesn't have the money, they cannot support grad students. So, anyone who's graduating with a bachelor's degree in physics or astronomy, or has some intention of going into astronomy as a professional career at the graduate level, this is going to make it much harder to do it within the United States. Now let's look at grad students. Grad students, they are going to, when they graduate, they have to get a job. And typically the way they do that is through something known as a postdoc position. Basically, they will do pure research at some institution. Sometimes a university, but oftentimes places like NASA or an observatory like at Keck or Lowell Observatory. They will be what is known as a staff scientist. It's not exclusively the case, but most astronomy grad students, when they graduate with their PhD, they will become a staff scientist somewhere doing pure research. As you probably have figured out, that money to fund that research is going to drastically be cut. Therefore, those jobs are going to dry up. There will be I cannot imagine a world in which we have this budget where there are no hiring freezes. So a whole bunch of grad students are going to graduate with a PhD. They're going to go through that lovely process, and they're not going to have a job in the United States to go to. The job market in astronomy is honestly fairly anemic. It's difficult to find a good position in the United States. It's possible. I mean, obviously, it's self-sustaining. We do graduate PhDs, and they do. Most of them, or a good portion of them, do find jobs, but not all of them. Certainly not all of them. This is going to make that situation markedly worse. And then, and also, that's going to have an effect on once you're done with your postdoc, you typically will go the traditional route of professorship. You will work for a university as a tenure track professor. Part of your getting hired, part of the process to get hired, and part of the process of getting tenure is your ability to bring in money. If NASA is not giving out money, then you can't get money to show the university, and so your chances of getting a job as a professor or getting tenure are going to be markedly decreased. This budget is not just going to affect, whether or not we send up X satellite over time. I mean, it is, But it's more than that. It's going to affect jobs. Not only is it going to affect present jobs, it's going to affect future jobs that people are currently banking on existing once they go through the academic process. I talked about this idea that in the United States is a world leader in astronomy and space technology. Um, that's going to change because one, we're not funding the research anymore, or not at the levels that we were going to. Again, allegedly, this is speculative, but I can't imagine that these cuts are going to get any less drastic. I mean, we're talking about a 50% decrease in the research funding for NASA. Even if you were to cut that back by 10%, you're still talking about a 40% decrease in research funding. So for those of you out there who might be thinking that I'm being hyperbolic or alarmist or whatever, you really haven't been paying attention to how NASA has been funded in the past. This is historic. This is a drastic, radical cut to NASA funding. It certainly signals a change in our priorities in terms of being a world leader in science, which I'll get to at the end of my rant. But going back to this is not going to just affect space missions or whatever. It's going to affect real jobs. It's going to affect people who are counting on jobs existing once they get out of grad school. It's going to affect people who are young professionals trying to get permanent positions on what we call hard money. Hard money is salaries that are paid by a institution that is not funding dependent. Soft funding is when your salary is dependent on grant funding. Postdocs, that's soft money. Your position is funded through a grant, so therefore if the grant gets cut, the postdoc position goes away, you get fired, laid off. So it is the ideal of all astronomers out there to get into a position of hard money where the university is paying you some base amount of salary so that you can have a secure job. So this is going to affect, I don't know, I don't have numbers for you. I would say that it's certainly going to affect tens of thousands of jobs in the near term, probably hundreds of thousands of jobs on the long term. Because again, this is done every year. So these funding levels will probably stay the same unless something drastic happens. Unless he realizes, oh, wait a minute, we can't keep up with the Chinese at these funding levels, and does something like, oops, sorry, I didn't realize we fired all the Ebola researchers. We kind of need to hire them back. Unless something like that happens, these look to be the funding levels for the next 4 years. Which means that if you are one of these people, if you are an astronomer or a student who's going into astronomy, you're going to have to, you have now more pressure to go international. Right now, the trend has been we have more international students coming in than we have American students going out. I highly anticipate that to be flipped. That more American students are going to leave the country to go to grad schools in Europe and in Asia than those folks coming here. Because again, we just simply will not have the money to support those salaries. Professional jobs, postdocs, research positions particularly on satellites or any kind of satellites or any kind of installations, space installations or anything of that nature. Again, you're going to see more. We're not going to do it. So that is going to be taken up by probably China. When I say probably China, it's definitely China, but it might only be China. I don't know how much the ESA, the European Space Agency, can or organization. I can never remember if it's the ESO or ES. I think it's the ESA. ESA is their NASA. ESO is their uh, AAS. I don't know how much slack that the ESA is going to be able to take up in terms of job creation and being able to take the surplus of American talent that just can't find any place to live within the United States in terms of the astronomical community. I don't know. India might also will definitely benefit from this. I think there's going to be a larger influx of American talent going to India to support their space administration. Japan, Korea might see an influx. I don't know. At this point, I'm really kind of talking out of my ass. But bottom line is our leadership in this area is going to diminish greatly. And I think the Chinese are going to definitely capitalize on that. Take that as you will. This is not a judgment statement. I'm just stating that given these budget levels, astronomy is not a high priority for the Trump administration. So if you're interested in space, if you're interested in space research, United States will no longer be the country to really go to, is no longer the really go-to country for this, which as an astronomer, I find to be particularly problematic. Now, let's talk about private industry. I will get into that in a second. And yeah, I haven't really been paying attention to the chat, so I will stumble back to talk about these things. But let's talk about specifics. Again, the passback has not been released. We simply know what the proposed budget levels are, but in terms of what's getting cut, what's not, we don't know. We only have speculation at this point. Some of it is pretty solid speculation, whereas others is it's getting a little more tenuous as to what's going on. This is the current astrophysics fleet. So basically, all of this is what is currently being funded from that astrophysics pot of money and has been in the past. So in 1990, we have Hubble, we have the Grand Observatory era. We have Hubble, we have Chandra, we have Newton, um, why is Spitzer not on? Spitzer not, I don't know why Spitzer's not on there. Anyway, and then you spin around, you got TESS. TESS is an exoplanet, is doing the heavy lifting for finding exoplanets at this point. We have Webb, which has obviously been deployed. We have Euclid, which has been deployed. I'm not entirely certain about XRISM. And then we get into the missions that are currently slated for launch and or development. Over here, we have Pioneers or CubeSats. These are smaller missions that have very specific goals in mind. You might notice right here, again, you can't see my cursor, but oh, now you can. Landolt. That is the mission that George Mason is leading. Dr. Peter Plavchan, a professor here at George Mason, is the PI or primary investigator for Landolt. So this has direct implications for us here at George Mason. I've talked a little bit I just recently put out a members video talking a little bit more about this. I will continue to do so and talking about this in more depth there. So if you'd like to be, if you would like to be more informed as to how all of this is going to affect Landolt specifically, then please consider becoming a channel member. There are a couple of things that are, in my opinion, egregious that are thinking about being cut. The most of which is this involves this telescope down here. This telescope is called, howdy, Judy. This telescope is called the Nancy Robin telescope. It is effectively the American equivalent to Euclid in that its primary mission is cosmological. It is designed to help us answer questions about the realities of dark matter and dark energy. Now, what is beyond the pale, in my opinion, is that this telescope is built. It is currently done. Right now, it is in the launch development stage. basically now they are working on getting this telescope into a rocket and launching it, which would take less than a year. This thing is slated to launch within the next year. If this budget goes through, it is fairly much of a certainty that the Nancy Roman telescope will be cut, that it will not fly. A perfectly good telescope that I don't know the budget of it, but I would estimate that there's been a couple $1 billion spent in the development of Roman. It will not fly for reasons that I just cannot possibly fathom. Another mission that will not happen is, and I don't know if it's on here, you may have heard of something called the Mars Recovery Mission. Basically, with Perseverance out there, with the rovers out there, and Ingenuity, one of the things they're doing is they're not just taking samples and studying them on site. They're doing that, but they're not just throwing the samples away. They're storing the samples and depositing them in certain locations on Mars. The idea was that we would develop a system by which we send something out to Mars to pick up those samples and bring them back to the Earth so they can be studied with more precision, more in depth, with better laboratory conditions, that sort of thing. I've always felt that was kind of a PR sort of tack on at the very end. That mission has never been very well defined for me in terms of what it actually is going to do. So I'm not overly surprised that it's getting cut, particularly since it, as is the trend with NASA missions, is running over budget. Its budget has been overblown. Those two things are speculation, but they're pretty firm speculation. There's really little doubt as to whether or not that is going to happen if this budget passes. What is much more on a speculative basis is Goddard. So the two main research divisions within NASA are Goddard and JPL. With this budget, there is talk that this Goddard Space Flight Center will no longer exist, that it will be discontinued. So all of those people will either lose their jobs or get shunted out elsewhere based on funding levels. The idea that we're even in a situation where we're talking about shutting down Goddard is, I don't know what kind of bizarro world we're living in anymore. Goddard is one of the premier research institutions in research divisions within astronomy. And they're talking about getting rid of it, not cutting it back, but cutting it out entirely. I just don't understand how anyone could possibly think that we could compete at any level in terms of astronomical research and development by getting rid of Goddard. That is not possible. Now, in terms of Landolt and such, we fall into a weird area because, given what Doge has done, and given how the tactics of the Trump administration when it comes to cutting funding, is they go for the obvious stuff. They go for the big branches. The Roman telescope. Oh, that costs billions of dollars. Let's just hack that shit off. The Mars Recovery Mission, just hack that off. Landolt, on the other hand, is only a paltry $20 million over 5 years. So what we're hoping is that we are not the finger that sticks out the most. That essentially the Landolt mission will continue to be funded because quite frankly, it'll be overlooked. That it'll be too small for the chainsaw to get to. Again, that is pure speculation at this point. But considering that one of the missions at this sort of level that's going to be, again, has the certainty of it being cut is comparable to the certainty of Nancy Roman being cut, and that is a probe that I believe is called Da Vinci that is supposed to go to Venus. It is the furthest along in its development. I think it may be fully built or very close to being fully built, but it is also on the chopping block. So there is a little bit of indication that that projects some that are similar-ish, still bigger than us, but similar to us, are going to get cut. Ultimately, what they have stated is that when it comes to all of these other missions, Ultrasat, Ariel, LISA, probes, all that, those aren't happening. Effectively, we're going to have Hubble, we're going to have JWST because they can't do anything about it, and that's it. We will not, in the foreseeable future, put anything else into orbit as far as astronomical research goes, as an astronomical telescope or instrument goes. And given that these missions don't happen overnight, Hubble took, I think Hubble was first proposed in the late 70s. So depending on how you count things, it took 20 years for Hubble to get put into orbit. Again, depending on how you count it, it's about the same for Webb. So if we basically cut the funding now, we cut all of these missions. It's not just cutting missions over the last few next couple of years. If we decide that we want to reverse course and actually start sending telescopes back up there, it's going to take us even longer to do so, even if we have the funding for it. So this is going to drastically change the landscape of the American space presence. Howdy, Maya. All right. Now, let's get to, there are some questions about space. So let me put this in a certain perspective. In the sense of, does the Trump administration have any justification for doing what it's doing? Sadly, yes. It is well known within astronomical circles that NASA funding is bloated, is not the right term. NASA funding is not efficiently spent. To give you an idea, James Webb was supposed to launch, I think, at least 5 years before it did, and its initial budget was $1 billion. It's a lot. Not going to say it's not. It's a lot. Its actual budget was $10 billion. So its actual budget was 10 times its initial budget, for no good reason as far as as can be determined. It just ballooned out because of how NASA operates. So and it's not a one-off. James Webb is not the only telescope where that's been the case. The Mars recovery mission has also suffered the same ballooning in budget. So the way that NASA is currently operating is not efficient anyway. We are definitely spending either our initial costs are underinflated for reasons, and the 10 billion is actually what James Webb is cost. But more than likely, there was a lot of waste in that process, or a good amount of waste in that process. So yes, NASA can be run more efficiently. However, in order to do that, that requires a scalpel. That requires a nuanced study of how the money is being spent. Particularly, we're getting insight here as to how that process is working. When it comes to I was talking with Peter today, and he was talking about things like all of the safety requirements, all of the risk management. There are things behind the scenes that he had no conception of that require time and require money. So that he did not originally budget for. And so his budget is evolving as he gets more involved in the process and learns more and more about how these things come into fruition. So, is there room for improvement? Of course, there is. Is there? I don't know what it is. This is something that I have no expertise on. I have no idea how I've never been on a space mission before where I had to deal with any kind of budgets or any kind of program management or any of that nature. But what I do know is that we have drastically overspent repeatedly on projects in the past. So that can be addressed, but that requires a scalpel. That requires a nuanced understanding of the processes in this that are undergone, and which processes can be streamlined, which processes can be cut, and which processes can't, which no need to be left alone. What the Trump administration is doing is not doing that, as far as I'm aware. They are just simply cutting funding. They're just saying because you cannot handle the money efficiently, we're just not giving it to you. That's one. That's the ultimate interpretation. Now, someone mentioned space industry. When I first heard about this, um, I was wondering whether or not this was a sort of not so subtle handing off of the reins to Elon. Whether or not this was essentially a drastic push for the United States to move from a government funded space agency to corporate space agencies, which I think is part of the equation. I think that the Trump administration does actively want to move a lot of what NASA does to the private sector because the implication is, or the prevailing wisdom is that corporations can do it more efficiently. I don't know exactly if I buy that argument, particularly in terms of human safety. I think history. I think I'm okay with saying that history has shown that I am right in saying that corporations do not have a great track record when it comes to actually giving a shit about uh, safety of their workers, of employee safety standards. So I think doing that shift, while it will have certain benefits, we will see a much faster growth in uh, satellite satellite development, possibly even development to missions to moon, missions to Mars. It's going to come at a real human cost because people are going to die in the attempt. And unlike Elon, I am not willing to laugh that off, which he literally did. Um, However, that doesn't explain or um, does not help with the astrophysics division. Corporations don't give a shit how exoplanets are formed. They certainly don't care whether or not dark energy is a thing, unless they can figure out some way of monetizing it. Corporations are only driven through profits. That's the only thing they care about. That's not a judgment statement. That's just how capitalism works. Is that a corporation is only going to fund things that it feels are in its own best interest, financially or from a public interest standpoint, which ultimately leads to a financial gain. Pure astronomical research has no immediate financial gain. Ultimately, it will, because ultimately we will get to a point where we will have technologies where we can start probing, we can start sending things out to other planets. And before we do that, we need to have a very good understanding of what those planets are and so forth. And that information, or that understanding has to start now. It can't start when we are ready to go to Alpha Centauri. So, in terms of howdy blue. So um, oh, all right, that, yeah, okay. Um, yeah, in terms of saving the jobs of grad students, of astronomers, and all that, moving to the corporate sector is really not going to be sustainable. Um, you are Moped. Can you tell me how long NASA has been around and doing this, and how long SpaceX has been sending manned missions to space? Because the fact that you are even equating these two shows a remarkable ignorance as to what the hell is fucking going on. And it shows that you are not paying attention to what SpaceX is doing. Literally, the third launch of SpaceX, the Dragon capsule, they did not care if it landed. They sent it up, and they cared as to the reentry. But once it got through a significant part of the atmosphere, yeah, if it landed, great. If it didn't, who cares? Thankfully, it was not manned. But that's the sort of mentality that we are dealing with at the corporate level, is that they don't care what happens beyond their bottom line. So long as so long as the Dragon capsule didn't crash into anything that would cause them to be financially liable, they don't care. So, yeah, okay. People have died under NASA's watch, but they haven't died over SpaceX. When SpaceX gets to the point of having as many manned missions as NASA has, let's compare body count at that point. So, yes. So that's basically where we are in terms of astronomical research. That is the proposed, like I said, the proposed budget. Oh, all right. Sorry. Mopped. If if that was sarcasm, I apologize. That's something that I take very seriously in terms of human cost, and one of the things that I think is drastically being overlooked, um, ghoulishly overlooked, in my opinion, when people talk about, oh, we need to give it over to the corporations because the corporations are much more efficient. Sure, but they also are much better at killing off their employees than than NASA is. So, and howdy, Dora. So yes, I apologize, misunderstood what you're saying, and like I said, because it is something that I feel strongly about. I am very easily my ability to sense sarcasm is significantly decreased. But anyway, um, so what I wanted to tie this up to, actually, Stephanie mentioned something. Um, let's see. Versus says, I work in software projects associated with the Copernicus program, and after asking around, have never heard about any satellite mission that stayed within the initial budget or timeline. Yeah. Um, I think the problem, and I think you also see this in the corporate sector, but not nearly to the extent that NASA. NASA has a budget balloon problem that has been well acknowledged and established within the community. So that is definitely something that needs to be addressed. That NASA can do better, but again, simply cutting the funding is not doing us any favors. Let's see. Maybe astronomy courses should be sold as a good minor for business and engineering majors interested in sales and technologies of equipment and needed to observe the cosmos. That's a rather cynical view of things. I would not want that to be the case, but I suppose there is some use to that. I do believe that at this point it's sort of tangential to this, but when we're talking about talking to the next generation, I don't know how schools are doing this, but when people are talking about space and all that, going to space and all that, you think of either two categories of people: physics and astronomy, and Katy Perry. You either have professional physicists, engineers going into space, or you have ridiculous space tourists going up into space. But in actuality, the space industry is going to affect a lot of different sectors. Like I keep saying, Branson has been unashamedly, he knows what he wants. He wants space tourism. He wants to put casinos in space. God bless him. That's going to require a whole lot of non-engineers. You're going to need staff. You're going to need basically any kind of staff that you have at a casino. You're going to need an analogous person in any kind of space casino. You're going to need people to market the casino to potential clients. So, and then that's not even to say anything about space law and government policy that's going to have to drastically catch up to the realities of space technology. So, in terms of marketing astronomy to other sectors, I think that is actually a good idea. I think when someone says, "Hey, I want to go into hospitality management," somebody might want to say, "Hey, by the way, that's probably going to be a huge field within the next decade in space. So you might want to keep an eye out on that." Who knows? Um, so yeah, let's see. Sort of flared Katy Perry's would be tap water. Um, yeah, I just as an aside with the whole flight thing, I I don't know. I don't know. I it took me a while. I was wondering why Katy Perry was getting so much shit from people from this. I never saw any of the. I didn't see her flight. I didn't see her kiss the ground afterward. I didn't really. I heard a little bit of what she said pre-flight about reading about string theory, which I have thoughts on. Not not polite ones, but I have thoughts about Katy Perry on the realism of Katy Perry reading about string theory. Um, but yeah, I had no idea what the flack was, but apparently she just over marketed the shit out of this and was really using it as a way to sell her new album. But you know, space tourism is a space tourism, and I don't get my knickers in a twist when I see millionaires, billionaires go up for space tourism because that's a thing, and there's no shame in space tourism. I think it is just a valid business endeavor as anything else. And yes, I think if you look at any sort of travel, if you look at plane costs, for example, the first if you were to go back to the 60s and you wanted to fly intercontinental, you're talking thousands of dollars in 1960s money. I mean, obviously, it's not the amount of money need to go into space, but it's certainly prohibitive from the average Joe Schmo on the street would not be able to afford a plane ticket. Now, the average Joe Schmo could afford a plane ticket, usually in the luggage compartment, but they can afford an intercontinental plane ticket because the technology has evolved, because the businesses have evolved. So the same is we have to basically the same model is being developed there. So if we the peons, the plebeians, ever want to get into space, then the rich, the uber rich, are going to have their field day, and they can risk their lives to figure out for 10 minutes in space, so that the technology can be more affordable for us. So I don't I don't give a shit whether or not Katy Perry went up there, or um, what is her Gail, journalist whose name I am completely skipping out on, Gail something or other. Um, I don't care if they go or whatever. Uh, they're not astronauts. Astronaut is a profession. You don't call people on a cruise liner sailors, or passengers on a cruise liner sailors. They're passengers. Katy Perry was a passenger. That's it. She was not an astronaut or anything of that nature. So, howdy, Frank. Yeah, it has been a while. Um, String Theory doesn't suit me. Yeah. Her album was a flop. Yes, from my understanding, it was completely derivative nonsense. Is what I'm hearing from it. I stopped listening to Katy Perry after the California Girls album. And yes, I did listen to Katy Perry, and I still like those songs. So, whatever. Gail King, thank you. Um, um, what I want to talk about now has to do with sort of a kind of going into uh, the science skepticism part of my content. You know, Flat Earth has made a lot of hay about being censored, about how Google will deprioritize them, all that sort of thing. And they will, same thing with vaccine and anti-vaxxers, is that their information is being deplatformed or what have you. That's all well and good. And there is an argument to be made that that is a form of censorship. But what we are seeing now is actual censorship in the fact that the Trump administration has been very clear that it does not like science. It does not agree with climate science is radically getting defunded because the overall consensus of climate science is that we are contributing to global warming, we are contributing to climate change, and we are destroying the planet. They don't want to hear that for reasons, probably to do with the oil and gas industry giving them money so that they can put it up to their ears and la 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 la. I don't hear you because of all the millions of dollars I'm getting from kickbacks. Probably that's my my guess as to why they're not accepting the science. So instead of trying to refute the science, they're just going to defund it. And if you defund the science, then the science can't be done. Then it's censored. If you cannot afford to actually do the science, then you are effectively cutting off, you are silencing that science from being done. For Flat Earth, if I would say that Flat Earth is being censored only in the fact that it's not being funded. I think there are very genuine or very valid reasons for why it's not being funded. But if it could be funded, then it would no longer be censored because then you would actually have scientific results and you could go from there. But true censorship comes down to money, in my opinion. Because if you are not able to do the science, then you can't say anything that you might not want to hear. With the transgender community, research funding is getting cut for that. Why? Because we don't want to have research that may affirm that transgender is actually a biological condition, that it is not a choice, it is not a lifestyle, it is simply something that somebody experiences. Just like being male, just like being female, that science will back up that this is in fact a thing. And so it's being censored by being defunded. And I think the same thing is happening with astronomy, is that I don't know, this is reaching, but it honestly disturbs me that Mike Johnson is a young Earth creationist, that Mike Johnson thinks that the universe is 10,000 years old. So if I wanted people to think that the universe was 10,000 years old, and yes, I am going on a conspiracy mode, is if I wanted people to think that it was 10,000 years old, I would cut the money to anyone who is doing research that said contrary, which is what's happening now. Is We are, without this money, we cannot do an effective job at answering questions like, where did the universe come from? Was there a beginning? Was there something prior to the beginning? Did we actually come from nothing? These fundamental questions, we will not be, we are going, these fundamental questions, the answers are going to be slower in coming because of the fact that we are simply not going to have the money to develop the resources to which to answer these questions. Um, so, so that to me is real censorship. And that is what I see the US government doing now, is that any sort of policy that it does not agree with, it is going to defund it so that it can't be, so scientists can't then just come out and say, oh, look at this study that basically says you're full of shit. That won't happen because there won't be money for that study to be done. Now, I don't know of any I don't think we are getting into the regime of Big Brother in the sense that um, funding is being motivated by policy, although I think it was Coco. I think you shared with me a article that was fairly disturbing that some or some politician somewhere, I think it was a state politician, um, sent an email to a reputable medical journal demanding them to explain their impartiality. Basically, demanded to know how they were not, how they were funded, whether or not the funding was contingent on a certain agenda that they were putting forward, that sort of thing. That shows a complete misunderstanding or a complete lack of understanding of how scientific journals actually operate. But it also shows an intention of of coupling science with political agendas, which for the most part, there isn't that sort of coupling. Pure science, as I constantly try to explain, the drum that I constantly beat is that science, if it is done properly, does not operate under a worldview. It does not have some sort of preconditioning notion, such as um, environmental factors cause autism. So therefore, we are going to ignore all genetic implications or any sort of genetic sources. We are just going to concentrate on environmental factors to autism. That's what we're going to fund. So I guess we are kind of approaching Big Brother sort of or an Orwellian sort of situation where government policy is now going to dictate scientific funding in the specific. It is going to dictate, it is going to apply a bias to scientific studies. That, to me, is yet another. We are not a fascist country. I am not going to say that Trump is a fascist. I'm not going to say the Republican parties are fascist. I think Trump wants to be a fascist. Um, and I think it is easy for me to envision this country becoming fascist adjacent with Trump and the Republican Party currently at the head. But I will not go so far as to, I will not even come close to saying that we are a fascist country, thankfully. But shit like this, shit like what what Robert Kennedy is doing, with prioritizing a certain worldview in terms of science and how it's he wants it to be allergy he wants it to be some kind of preventable disease, even though the current science tells us that it's not. He wants it to be, so therefore he is only going to fund science that agrees with his supposition. That is not how science is done. That is the route of young earth creationists. That is the route of certain flat earthers that I know, is that you have a worldview of what you believe the world should be, and therefore you only support positions that agree with that supposition. And either you reject evidence to the contrary, or you only concentrate your research interests into areas that you think will support your argument. So, um, government funding has not always been that way, at least not in the sciences. Um, we do not have an agenda in terms of, oh, we want the, unlike what Powell will tell you, or what's his face, I'm not prepared for that, Hovind, folks like Powell and Hovind or whatever, there is not this agenda that we want the Big Bang Theory to be right, and so therefore we defund any sources that will that work against it. That isn't how it's set up. There, it gets a little bit there. There's a somewhat grain of truth in there somewhere that I've talked about before, in that there becomes fads within science that get more funding. I don't agree with that, but that is a symptom of an imperfect system built by imperfect beings. But on the overall extent, there is not a agenda, a political agenda that science is attempting to prove or disprove. Um, I can't speak to the medical industry. I cannot speak to the pharmaceutical companies or what have you. I don't think that you and I think, would have varying, would have a, I believe that medical research is biased to a certain extent, but probably for different reasons than you would think it's biased. I think it's biased because it's what makes money. It is only looking at, because it is corporate, it is only looking at those things that can feed the bottom line. Why cure a disease when you can produce a remedy for the disease that mitigates the symptoms that the person would have to take over and over and over again? You get more money out of the second situation than the first. So, in that way, I would I would support the notion that the medical industry, particularly the pharmaceutical industry, is definitely biased. But are they attempting to? I will not go so far as to say, oh, they are, forcing COVID to be a thing because they want to force people into lockdown or what have you, or any of that nature. I think that's kind of rubbish. But but yes, so science doesn't operate like that, um, generally speaking. And RFK Jr. is definitely going in that direction. And even still, even with the COVID business, that's not government. That was all pharmaceutical companies. This is governments. This is a government agency directing government research in a direction that has no, that actually is, the evidence for it is contrary. From my understanding, when it comes to autism, environmental factors have been all but ruled out. That our understanding is that autism is caused by some sort of genetic, um, by some sort of uh, issue with genetics, that some kind of mutation or some kind of genetic ordering creates these disorders, the autism spectrum. That it is not because you are having too much fluoride in your diet, or you get a vaccine, or what have you. This is not a disease that you catch. This is a disease that you are born with. Um, so that is what the scientific consensus is at the moment in terms of autism. What RFK Jr. is doing is he's looking at that and saying, nope, I refuse to accept that for whatever reason. I have it in my head that vaccines are the cause of this, so I am going to only fund research that will support my supposition, my opinion of where autism comes from. And that is dangerous. Is that the case for astronomy? I don't think so. I don't see any evidence of that yet. But am I afraid that it might be? Yes. Because with the rise of evangelical Christians, the rise of fundamentalism, we are seeing a rise. I guarantee. Well, I am putting good money on that. We will see a rise in young Earth creation sentiment in popular media. We will start seeing people coming out and actively saying, "Yes, I think the Earth is only 10,000 years old. Yes, evolution is garbage and should not be taught in our schools." Um, those are all those are all scientific viewpoints that are motivated by not science. They are not motivated by data. They are motivated by some other worldview, be it religion or what have you. And so I am afraid that's what's going on. That's what's going to happen. And by undercutting NASA and undercutting NASA's funding, that silences any sort of research that can be done in the future to combat the idea that the universe is only 10,000 years old. Granted, we basically can combat that effectively now, but it will it will stifle that voice. So um, let's see. You're chatting with Will about what? Young Earth creationist? Um, let's see here. Because of the rate of autism increasing with the number and kinds of, I would need to see data on that. I don't believe that is the case. The the rising science denial, actually, interesting. Um, I would be very curious to know what he has to say on that, because I know what he has said, and he has stated that flat Earth is science denial, whereas young Earth creationism is not, which is wrong. Um, so yeah, I'm hoping. Obviously, you are moped or you are mopped. I don't know you. I'd like to know you, so I don't know where you fall on all this, but I would hope that anyone who has a discussion with Will Duffy or any young Earth creationist when it comes to the topic of science denial really needs to push hard with this notion that young Earth creation isn't science denial. Um, one of the things I want to be covering soon is going over Answers in Genesis, because they have a couple of websites that are dedicated to, is creationism anti-science, or is are creationists anti-science? Obviously their answer is no, they aren't. There's a website that says what is science, where they try to describe what science is. It is a poor attempt for a number of different reasons. One, it's wrong. Two, it's way too simplistic. Um, so you are all right. Do it. Whatever. All right, let's do it. YouTube. Dun, dun, dun. Francis talking to Billy Mitchell. Isn't he a fraud? I know he won his case, but isn't he still a fraud and potentially worse? I don't know. Weird. You are mopped. You are mopped. Holy crow! You are a big channel. Well, you just got bigger. There you go. Subbed. Um, yeah, I thought Billy Mitchell still cheated, but he just didn't do what the other dude alleged that he did, such as contribute to someone's death. Anyway, so random guy on the internet you've never heard of having interviews with interesting people. Interesting. Oh, I see you interviewed FTFE at some point. Um, yeah. Uh, Tune. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll definitely check out this later. But yes, I think anyone who is going to discuss science denialism with Will Duffy really needs to press him on the fact that young Earth creationism is in fact science denialism. Their definition of science is simply wrong. That is not how science is actually done, and I don't, from a philosophical standpoint, that is not how science should be done. Because you are science, in order for science to be done properly from a philosophical standpoint, it needs to be done openly. It needs to be data driven solely. Your any sort of implications from the any sort of scientific gains should be derived from a unbiased interpretation of the data. And creationism doesn't have that. They have the built-in bias that God exists and that that God's plan is somewhat accurately described through the literal interpretation of the Bible. That is not a bias that you can just hand wave, and that is not a bias that will provide you with good science, with actionable science. And so, yeah. So I hope so. I hope people get pushed with it, pushed on that. Yeah. Also, with the whole abortion issue, again, not gonna. I've already talked about him enough. Yeah, I've said my piece about Mr. Duffy and how much I would prefer that he not be platformed in a positive light. That if people choose to platform him in one way or another, that he need to be challenged on his other viewpoints. The fact that he can debate against a flat earther does not impress me in any way whatsoever. That is the minimum bar to me in terms of science competency. Um, so, so yeah, things are on the yeah. So the rate is increasing. The rate may in fact be increasing objectively, but it's certainly, this is another bias or selection effect that that one needs to recognize, is that something, when you look at, let's put this in astronomical perspective. I look at a section of the sky with a 1 meter telescope, and I look at all of the stars that are G stars, that are have a surface temperature of about 6,000 Kelvin. And I look at the number of M stars, stars that are about 3,000 Kelvin. And I count them up and I get a ratio of, say, 2 to 1. I see twice as many G stars as I do M stars. Is that what we see in reality? Actually, no. If you have a much larger telescope and do a much more in-depth analysis, what you find is that there are far more M dwarfs out there than G dwarfs, and you missed them before because you could not detect them. With a 1 meter telescope, the 1 meter telescope just didn't have the light collecting power in order to see the light from those very low luminosity sources. With autism rates, we did not know autism. I'm assuming, going out on a limb here, but we did not know autism well enough to be able to create diagnostics that were precise enough to identify it. Effectively, we didn't know what it was well enough to identify it when we saw it. But now that we have studied autism as long as we have the scientific community has a much better understanding of what it is, how it presents. And so now our diagnostics are more precise. And so therefore we are picking up on cases that we would not have been able to identify, say, 10 years ago. So that is a bias due to, that is what we call a selection effect. That is a bias due to diagnostics. So, um, so yeah. So that is definitely one of the reasons why the autism rates have are appearing to rise. It's not necessarily because the rates themselves are actually getting higher. It's just that we are becoming better at finding them than we were before. Although, again, I am not saying that autism rates objectively have stayed constant. I am concerned that autism rates are actually getting higher because just from a me standpoint, from a Rob world standpoint, because what psychotherapy has taught me is that I am not unique in any way whatsoever. So therefore, my life experience must be the same as everyone else's life experience. I can tell you that I have noticed a rise in autistic students in my classes. Now, that could also be a selection effect because what that could mean is that the resources, that there are now more resources to support autistic students so they can get to the collegiate level and succeed at universities. So it's possible that I'm seeing more autistic students in my classes, not because there are more autistic students, but because there are more resources to help autistic students get to my level. So I don't know. Um, let's see. So to believe it's only genetic takes the responsibility away from us recognizing harmful and environmental and dietary effects. No, it does not. Um, what I am saying is, and again, not a biologist, but from my understanding, the research in autism, in the origins of autism, have ruled out it being caused by environmental factors. Does the environment affect autistic rates to some extent? Maybe. What that extent is not very significant because it hasn't been identified. And so, therefore, we're not saying that we shouldn't study harmful environmental effects or harmful dietary factors for other at all. But in terms of autism, then yes, we need to focus in on the on a genetic cause because we've pretty much ruled out that environment and dietary factors are not the primary causes for these things. So the other fact might be more acceptance. People that are on the spectrum are hiding it less. Yeah, they're masking it less. Um, so yes. Oh, of course. Yes. The rise is definitely worth looking into. Autism is a serious condition that affects a significant portion of our situation. Now, what RFK said about people with autism is disgusting. My knee jerk reaction was to kick him in the nuts repeatedly until he shut the fuck up. And to and if he should ever speak about autism again, someone needs to kick him in the nuts repeatedly until he doesn't. Um, the fact that he is advocating for an autism registry is fucking beyond the pale. Um, Tracking someone because of a medical condition without their consent is not acceptable for any reason. It is against HIPAA privacy laws. I am not a huge privacy pundit, but in terms of one's own medical information, I am a huge proponent for privacy laws. My medical conditions are no one's business outside of what I choose to reveal. And so the fact that RFK Jr. wants to track people based on their medical information if they have autism is completely fucking unacceptable. Um, Autism is a spectrum. So when he said that autistic people wouldn't be able to go on a first date, that is just fucking ignorant, bigoted bullshit. Autistic people go on dates all the time. I've known people who are autistic who go on dates. Like, this is not a isolated thing. Um, it's just, oh my, they can't pay taxes. I'm like, what fucking world do you, what? So what does he think autism is? Did he watch Rain Man and think, oh, okay, that's what autism is? Um, is he watching movies and saying, oh, all right, he sees a kid with a helmet bashing his head into a wall? Oh, that must be what autism is. Well, that's what all people with autism, that's what they've got. Because that's the only thing that I can think of is for the behind those statements is he has no conception at all of the reality of the autistic spectrum. I don't. I am certainly not an expert. I cannot speak to that, to the live experience of someone with autism, but I sure as shit know that they can date, that people on the spectrum can date, people on the spectrum can hold down jobs and pay taxes. That they are not, they do not destroy lives. Just fuck. I mean, it's kind of like saying, I mean, in a way, not to again make it about me, but if someone has bipolar to an extreme extent, that can destroy a family. Bipolar is very destructive in terms of social relationship, or very harmful in terms of social relationships, because of the fact that we do not regulate emotions properly, or we do not regulate emotions as expected. Then we can put people off. We can get very cold, very detached, and we can say some very hurtful things simply because we are in a position where we are so detached from our emotions. I know, at least for myself, that has been the case. So social interactions can seriously be harmed by bipolar. To the point that there's a couple of people that I know who are bipolar, who can't hold down jobs. They cannot actually, their ability to regulate their emotions and regulate their mood is so impaired that they cannot be consistent in their job performance. And so therefore they cannot hold jobs. And so therefore they would not be able to pay taxes. And they're on disability. That's valid. So you could very easily replace autism in that bullshit speech of his with bipolar. That is where shit gets, again, dangerous, in that someone's diagnoses, a disease or an illness has varying degrees of severity, for one thing. More certain diseases have a much larger range of severity than others, but they do vary on an individual basis. And just to sweep all of that with one brush, to say, oh, all artistic people feel or do this or experience this, all people with bipolar experience this, is harmful. It's disrespectful. It's just repugnant. And so, yeah, yeah, I don't know what the fuck he's doing. I honestly don't know what he is. I don't know if this is white guy saviorism, or where he thinks that, we've had our try in trying to solve the autism epidemic, and that he is the dude that's going to ride in on his white horse, and he's going to save all of these poor autistic people from not being able to take a shit properly. I don't know if it's that. I suspect it's that. I suspect that he wants to show people how big a brain he got, but that he's smart. But I don't know if it's sinister. Um, I think it can lead down sinister roads. Like, if this was Stephen Miller, yeah. If Stephen Miller suggested having a registry of any kind, yeah, that dude is fascist. That dude is a goose-stepping fucking Nazi. I fucking hate Stephen Miller. He is a disreputable human. He is just human garbage. Stephen Miller, I cannot. See, God tells me that I cannot judge others. It is not my right to judge others. I am not in a position morally to judge others. But fuck, oh, Stephen Miller, holy fuck, does he? Yeah. Let's just say that if he were in the, if I had to put money down on whether or not if Stephen Miller was living in the 1940s in Germany, um, fuck it. No, if Stephen Miller was living in the United States in 1940, if I had to put money down onto what his position on Hitler would be, pretty sure it would be pro Hitler. Let's just put it that way. He's an asshole and I hate him. Anyway, um, so that's kind of getting off topic. JFK RFK Jr. said this. He wants people with certain medical conditions to go to work camps. I'm gonna say citation needed on that one, because I cannot imagine that I would have somehow missed um, hearing that news. I don't tend to follow news as much anymore because I just my mental health really just can't handle it anymore. But I would have thought that I would have found that in my news feed at some point. Well, anyway, that's really all I had for today. And I'm starting to get into rambling issues, but I really just wanted to raise the issue of the fact that massive cuts to space research and technology at a government level are coming. They are an indisputable fact at this point. The only thing that's in that is still up for speculation is just how deep those cuts are going to be. But given what I'm looking at, given the the way that the current administration deals with Trump's initiatives, I am comfortable in saying that these cuts are going to be drastic and they are going to have very real world effects on the fields of astronomy, the fields of space science, particularly in terms of the number of jobs that are going to be that are currently in existence, and certainly based on the number of jobs that will be created within the next 4 years, or that could potentially be created within the next 4 years. I think this is effective. If we are in a space race with China in any way whatsoever, this is effectively conceding defeat. This is basically, well, not conceding defeat, more of saying, okay, we're stepping out of this race. We are no longer interested in having any kind of space race with China. Let them do them and we will do us. And somehow that's going to put America first. I haven't quite figured out if that is how that really works, how that mentality actually works, but I've long since um, long since given up trying to understand how any Trump policy is supposed to make sense in any way whatsoever. Um, it doesn't help when all the news is bad news. Yeah, effectively. Um, let's say so. So yeah, I wanted to start sounding the drum. I will almost certainly come back to this drum and beat on it some more because this is just, I don't know, maybe it is now hit home. This is the first time in my life, and I keep, every time I talk about this with people, I just feel like, oh, I'm now gone. I am now in my boomer get off my lawn stage of back in my day. Um, but I honestly don't think it's hyperbolic to say that I've never seen this country the way it is now, or the way that it's going. I have not seen so much pushback in terms of scientific research as I'm seeing now. I have never had government I've never had federal economic policy affect me on a personal level before, or at least one that I have been able to identify. Yes, that is because of this tariff, or that is because of this policy. It is becoming more challenging for me to be able to order equipment, astronomical equipment that would not have been a problem otherwise. One of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to get a replacement for our filter wheel here at the observatory. If all things being equal, we could easily order it, and we'd probably get it within the next month, and we would get it at the sale price of 14K. However, that would mean ordering from Canada, which I'm being told from the university level that is problematic. They haven't gone into details about it, but they have strongly suggested to me that I find a domestic source for it, which isn't easy to do, for one. And for two, I can't get it at the discounted rate. Also is that I want to buy some 4 more 8-inch telescopes. Those come from those are manufactured in China. So either I need to get them done now, or get those in now, or face massive increases in telescope cost. But again, I'm having to actually I have to it's the 24th. Great. The company that I need to talk to is basically closed down until the end of Passover or whatever. They don't come back to work until the 27th. But I need to contact them and get reassurances from them that the costs they have on their website are going to be the costs that we are going to be the cost of the telescopes when we buy them. Never had to do this before. Never had to worry about whether or not the cameras. My favorite is cameras come from ZWO. Guess what? It's made in China. ZWO is a Chinese company. The cost of these cameras, which are very good cameras, by the way. ZWO, if you want to sponsor my channel, I'm open to negotiate. Excellent fucking cameras. Prices of these are probably going to skyrocket, assuming they are even available in the United States at all. I've never seen this before. Maybe it's because I have never, when I was a couple decades ago, I was not old enough and not in a position of responsibility where I had to deal with this sort of thing. So maybe this sort of shit happened back when I was a kid, but I don't think so. I certainly didn't hear my parents bitching about it. So, Bresser telescopes, they appeared to be European. I don't know. Never heard of those. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about the fact that the scientific landscape of the United States is definitely changing. This is not being hyperbolic. It is definitely changing because of or it's radically changing because of the political motivations of the current administration. This is not some kind of pocket thing like Star Wars was for Reagan. This is a systemic change in scientific research, at least in astronomy and space science. I'm fairly certain the people over in the medical fields are like at the CDC, the NIH. They've already felt this sort of shit because Doge has already cut into them with a chainsaw. They basically got rid of USAID. So I'm sure this is not news to a lot of people, to certain people, but it has now hit me at home. It has hit me where I work. I have seen the effects of it, and it could potentially affect what I want to do here at George Mason. Because if the Landolt mission does get canceled, then a lot of the outreach that I'm currently doing, a lot of the programs that that we have that are engaged with elementary school students and try to get them inspired and into science and into astronomy specifically, we won't be able to support that. Those outreach efforts are predicated on the existence of the Landolt mission. So if Trump's budget goes through and Landolt is actually cut, which is it's not even a non-zero possibility. It's a possibility. I'm not saying it's a significant possibility, but it's certainly not an insignificant possibility. It is a possibility. Landolt gets cut. My outreach efforts, my plans for the future of outreach, and honestly, astronomy education within the department go away or become much, much, much more difficult because I have this secret plan that the university doesn't quite know about of building and having them build me an observatory, but I haven't told them yet. So keep it under wraps. But if Lando goes away, then a lot of the motivation for said observatory is going to go away. Um, so yeah, it is situation sucks, and it's going to affect colleagues of mine, friends of mine. It's going to affect my students, and people need to know about it, and people need to get loud because again, this is not something. This is not about economics. This is not about cost cutting or anything of that nature. This is purely political. We're talking about at current funding, we're talking NASA is 0.39% of the nation's GDP of the total, or rather the total budget. The military is tens of percent. I don't remember what exactly it is. I think it's around 20 to 30% of the total budget. Have I seen any indication that there are going to be serious cuts to military spending or even serious investigations on how to make military spending more efficient? No, I have not. All I've seen are institutions that put forward, shall we say, a certain agenda, such as climate science or uh, gender gender affirming science. Those are certainly being targeted. Aid to other countries, that is being targeted. Now, astronomy is being targeted because one, it has to do with climate change, but also I have this sinking suspicion there might be some kind of young Earth creationist bullshit going on in there. But again, that's more conspiratorially minded. Seeing these changes not because of economics or because of the fact that we want to make the government more efficient. We're seeing this because of philosophical and religious preferences. And that upsets me to the point that I can no longer stay quiet about it. I have a very small platform, so I'm just going to be continue. You're probably gonna get so annoyed with me that you probably will stop watching this channel because I will just keep beating this drum. If you want to look into activism for this, I would recommend actually looking into the Planetary Society. That is a society run by Bill Nye. They are it's from an astronomy point of view, they are the most politically motivated or the most politically tuned in. They are based in the United or they are based in Washington D.C. and I know they do a considerable amount of space advocacy already with the government. So they're the most tuned in. The next one would be the American Astronomical Society. That is almost exclusively professionals, professional astronomers, students, grad students, that sort of thing. Maybe some secondary education people, not so much lay people, but they are also slowly stepping up to the plate to get things done. So if you're interested in organizations that will help advocate for space science research, those are the two that I would start with, and and go from there. So for myself, I'm gonna advocate as much as I have energy to do so, because this is for me, it's finally gone too far. This is this is the line that I am no longer willing to accept, for better or for worse. So yeah, all right. Well, I think I am done sitting on my high horse and reaching to the interwebs. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the support. If you'd like to support the me uh, in this endeavor and trying to make this more of a second revenue stream, please consider becoming a channel member. Again, I'm making videos that are specifically about the Landalt mission and how the current situation is affecting us. I'm also going to be making more videos about the challenges that I'm facing here at the observatory, just from a maintenance point of view. So if you're interested in how the sausage is made at a campus observatory, do please consider becoming a channel member, and to see those sorts of that material. If you would like to help the observatory out, then please consider become a patron. Any monies I get from Patreon or PayPal go directly back into the observatory to help fund things like telescope covers and just all of the little miscellaneous things that add up significantly to the university budget, so that I can kind of help us save that money, the observatory budget, for labor costs, for more tour guides, more outreach, that sort of thing. Thank you, Yorma. He is a, I only became a subscriber to you. You've become a channel member. I think I'm going to have to up my game. I'll definitely check out your content. Thank you for becoming a member. I am Professor Parks, PhD. I make content on astronomy, science, skepticism, and mental health. If you like that sort of thing, please hit that like button, subscribe, share, do all that sort of thing. Hit that bell for notifications, because I do not post in any sort of regular schedule at all. So if you want to know when my videos come out, you're going to need notifications in order to get that. So, yes, once again, you are mopped. I'm hoping I'm getting your name right. You are mopped. Go over to his channel, sub his content. I haven't watched his content, but looking at it, one of them is Flat Earther Doesn't Understand Evolution, and the picture is of Flatzoid. So I'm pretty sure I am on board with the content on this channel. So without having watched it, I will go on a limb and endorse what's going on in this channel. So please, if you are a member of, if you are watching this and you have not subbed to You Are Mopped, please go over there and give them some love. All right. That being said, hope you all have a great day. Peace out and clear skies.